All right, P.A.S. report listeners, the holiday season is here. Why not make your life easy and choose design-it-yourself gift baskets? Whether it's a gift for that special someone, family, friends, employees, corporate clients, you don't have to rack your brain anymore. These gift baskets are perfect for any person. At designityourselfgiftbaskets.com, gift baskets can be fully customizable, or you can choose hundreds of pre-arranged gift baskets. Design It Yourself gift baskets are festive for the holiday season, whether it's Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, and you can be sure that these beautifully decorated gift baskets will make anyone feel appreciated. No matter who you're shopping for, go to designityourselfgiftbaskets.com. And best of all, you get to save money. P.A.S. report listeners can get 10% off your order using code PAS at checkout. So go to DIYGB.com, find the perfect gift this holiday season, and use coupon code PAS at checkout to get 10% off today.
Welcome to the P.A.S. Report Weekly Roundup Podcast. The P.A.S. Report provides an honest analysis on the critical issues that matter to you without the biased media filters. Here's your host, Professor Nicholas Giordano.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of the P.A.S. Report Podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano, and Twitter has dumped more of the Twitter files. Again, it illustrates what many of us already knew. The new batch reveals an organized and coordinated process to silence, censor, and marginalize those who went against specific narratives. And one of the most egregious cases is what they did to Dr. Jay Bhattacharya. He was at the forefront of the coronavirus pandemic, and he, along with a few others, put out the Great Barrington Declaration calling on focusing resources that would actually protect the most vulnerable, that would keep schools open and allow everyone to live their lives as normal. Perhaps if we actually listened to people like him, we would have saved lives. We would have prevented the catastrophic collateral damage that was done, particularly to children. Unfortunately, social media outlets like Twitter wouldn't allow him to be listened to because they were suppressing him and the Great Barrington Declaration. People really need to be held accountable for this, and we can never let this happen again. Sadly, the Twitter files aren't making it into the mainstream media's coverage. They make it as if it's much ado about nothing. And it's because they no longer engage in journalism. They have become nothing more than political activists. It's why I'm bringing in Fox News' Joe Concha, author of Come On Man, The Truth About Joe Biden's Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Presidency. I want to talk to him about the book and get his thoughts on the blackout of the Twitter files by the legacy media and the emerging media outlets that exist. The media, and we can no longer call them media, let's be honest about that, but they provide cover for the government and this administration, and this does a disservice to we the people. The lines are blurring between the media, the government, big tech, big corporations, and it's really become a problem. It's hit critical mass. This is part of the reason why we have this groupthink mentality that exists and why governments think that they could just mandate anything and everything that they see fit. It's not the way the system is supposed to work. Now, before I bring on Joe, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you find the show informative, share it with your family and your friends. And I want to hear what you think. Write a review on Apple Podcasts or drop me an email, podcast@pasreport.com. With that out of the way, I want to welcome Joe Concha to the PAS Report, author of the fantastic book. Everyone should read it. Come On Man, The Truth About Joe Biden's Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Presidency. And this book's a great stocking stuffer, right, Joe?
Absolutely. You know, it's funny. I was chewing. You could see me right now. And I'm so glad I had such a long title for the book because it allowed me to process the food properly and swallow before I answered your question. But yeah, this is what you do. You get this book for Christmas because I'm getting so much great feedback. And I'm not like the type of guy who pats himself on the back and says, yay, me. But boy, I'm just hearing from people just randomly on the street, which is weird. And I finished your book. I loved it. I said, what did you like most about it? And they say, you know what? It made me laugh because so many political books are so angry or dry or just, whatever. And this actually, I'm being told anyway, is entertaining because who better to give you copious amounts of material than Joe Biden, not just the presidency, but his entire life. The thing wrote itself. I got to be honest with you.
Well, I mean, when you're talking about South African prisons or corn pop, I mean, how can't you have fun with that? And that's the thing about politics today. You're right. A lot of it is doom and gloom. A lot of it does focus on the negative. And then, come on, man, you inject humor into the negativity, into the horrible presidency that he's having. And why do you think humor is important at this stage?
I think because we're all miserable. I mean, honestly, after the midterms, I never saw an election line up so well for one party, like we saw for the Republican Party going into these midterms. Inflation well above 7%, crime rampant, out of control. New York, Philadelphia, Minneapolis, Los Angeles, Portland, cities that you don't even think of that have crime problems suddenly are New Orleans is the murder capital of the country. Who knew, right? So between inflation and crime and a border that's allowed 5 million people to come into this country illegally. I mean, think about that. That's the population of Ireland. That's 7 Washington, D.C.s have entered this country illegally since this president took office. And all the fentanyl that's coming in and killing hundreds of Americans per day. And obviously the education system going completely sideways and governors like Youngkin and DeSantis doing very well on that issue. You think there is no way Republicans don't at least get 25, 30 seats in the House when you consider that Obama lost 63 and Clinton lost 54. So what's a Joe Biden presidency going to lose? And Republicans in the end only have a 9-seat majority. It's like, how did that happen? And how do you lose the Senate? I mean, against the John Fetterman, for example, who apparently is going to be in a Christian Bale movie coming up. And I'm not even joking about that. I mean, a John Fetterman who he wants to let 1/3 of the prison population back onto the streets when, as I mentioned, Philadelphia is breaking records in terms of homicides. A guy who, quite frankly, is not it does not have the cognitive ability to be in Congress or let alone the Senate, which is a 6-year contract. And here we are. So the Democrats controlling the Senate and now Biden's polling numbers going up. You say, where did we get to this malaise where we think this is the new normal and we need to accept this? So I think a lot of people are angry and they should be, or they're depressed and they should be. And I think once in a while, some escapism is a good thing. And as you mentioned, Chapter 12, Corn Pop Nick. I mean, that story, that was my favorite chapter to write because I had no idea the depths of how much Joe Biden can lie. And that chapter completely encapsulates that not so dubious talent.
Well, it's amazing. And you bring up some really important points about how there's this disconnect within reality. I mean, you have Republicans going around saying, well, the reason, first of all, I said from the beginning, Republicans can screw up a sure thing. Don't ever underestimate the stupidity of the Republican Party. But at the same time, they're complaining, well, we didn't run good candidates. And I'm sitting there like, well, John Fetterman, Raphael Warnock. I mean, come on now. They're not good candidates either. So it shouldn't be that you didn't run good candidates. It's that there's this disconnect that exists. As you said, Biden's poll numbers are going up. People's lives are much more difficult. And I think the 2010 election that you brought up is the perfect example where the economy was on the decline. Wasn't nearly as bad as it is today. You didn't have inflation back then. It was actually just the housing market that was really suffering, and there were layoffs going on. But President Obama got hammered in that midterm election. So what do you think is driving this disconnect between the Biden policies and people still voting for the Democrat Party, the majority party, that really is, encouraging criminal behavior by dropping all bail laws? They're encouraging illegal immigration to an extent that we've never witnessed before. Just so many things.
It's interesting when you say people are voting for the Democratic Party. I've come to this conclusion that people just vote against parties now, right? It's rooting against conservatives or Republicans or MAGA or however you want to characterize it. I think the Dobbs decision did have a bigger role than I thought it would, just because that bought some other voters that otherwise would have stayed home, female voters particularly. They ended up going to the polls in certain close races. And a lot of these races were 51-49, 50-49. I mean, so many close races that I think in some anyway, the Dobbs decision, Supreme Court, that had something to do with it. I don't think people really trusted Republicans. They were very good at pointing out all the things that we talked about, all the things going wrong with the economy and inflation and crime and the border and education. But then, I mean, and I asked this of people, and I've yet to hear somebody answer this question correctly. And Nick, I asked you this question. I'm going to put you on the spot.
Go for it.
When I asked the question, I didn't know the answer either. I had to Google it. Okay. So here's your question. Okay. What was the name of Kevin McCarthy's Contract with America 2.0? What was that called?
Well, it's funny that you should bring that up because guess what? I actually did 2 episodes on this and I totally roasted the plan. And I can't remember the exact name of it off the top of my head. That's how weak and feckless the plan was, that it pointed out the problems, but didn't say anything about solutions to the problem.
Right. I mean, generalities like we won't spend what we won't have. Okay, well, last time you guys were in power, you didn't curb spending either. So do I really trust you? On crime, I would trust Republicans a bit more, but I think that's more of a local issue, right? Like mayor's offices and governors and so on. But it wasn't hammered home enough, right? How does Katie Hobbs, to your point, win in Arizona? A woman who wouldn't debate her opponent. I've never seen this before. Nope, I'm not going to debate. Why? No, I'm just not going to do it because Carrie Lake would have wiped the floor with her, obviously. And people allowed this to happen. So I think the media played a big role also. I mean, it's an obvious statement. But, when John Fetterman says, I'm not going to debate, not until right before the election, 5 weeks after votes are cast, and I'll need closed captioning, and I'm going to need to practice with the moderators and all this. And if I were Oz, I'd say, no, I'm not giving you any of that because you have to debate on the Senate floor. You're not going to have that courtesy then. You don't get it now. And I would have demanded every day and have my press people every day say there needs to be a debate before voting begins. That's only fair. And
absolutely.
I'm like, okay, we'll do it October 27th. It's like, why? I never got that. So it's a whole
let's face it, in our busy lives, we don't eat enough fruits and vegetables. In fact, according to the CDC, only 1 in 10 Americans are eating the recommended daily amount of fruits and vegetables each day, missing out on essential vitamins, minerals, fibers, and antioxidants. And that's where Balance of Nature comes in. Balance of Nature sources only the best produce, free from pesticides, heavy metals, and harmful bacteria. And Balance of Nature is the best fruit and vegetable product on the market. They use only fresh, whole fruits and vegetables inside each capsule. They don't use any GMOs, fillers, binding agents, or preservatives of any kind. I would never endorse a product that I don't use myself, and since using Balance of Nature, I feel more alert, I have more energy, my focus is sharper, and I feel great. Live life to the fullest and choose Balance of Nature. P.A.S. Report listeners can get 35% off the first preferred order. Start getting the recommended daily amount of fruits and vegetables you need by using code PAS at balanceofnature.com. Even in New York, we had Zeldin going against Governor Hochul, and Congressman Zeldin wanted 3 debates. Hochul only agreed to 1. It used to be 3 debates was the norm, especially when you're talking about gubernatorial races and presidential races. She got absolutely hammered in that debate. She did horribly. Imagine if there were 2 other debates. Who knows if Zeldin could have pulled it out. But one of the biggest failures of the Republican Party...
Let me just jump in there because there's another important point about that because it's my old workplace. And that debate was on New York One, I believe. And New York One was my first job in broadcasting.
And nobody watches New York One, really.
Well, it has its niche, right? But it's you can only see it in the 5 boroughs. It's not really that's something that's broadcast throughout the state. So if you're upstate, you didn't even get to see that debate live. And then you only saw clips that were decided by the news organizations, the big zinger moment type of thing. But that was it. So, yeah, again, Zeldin, I would have said, no, we're doing this on the local ABC affiliate or whatever, or else I'm not agreeing to this. And that's what I mean. We kind of the Republican Party just bent over on some of these things and just took it instead of just demanding that these folks be held accountable. But anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Well, just look at education. I think that's a perfect example. 3 weeks before the election, the national report card issued by the Department of Education was released, showing the largest proficiency drop in 30 years, historic lows. And yet not one Republican went into the inner cities and said, this was from the school closures for 2 years. Look at what the officials did to your children to try and win those people to vote for them. And I think that encapsulates the failure. But you're in the media, and the media actually plays a very big role in insulating the Biden administration. Can you explain that role that the media now plays in completely insulating this administration?
And let's define media, right, Nick? It's not just traditional media, New York Times, Washington Post, CBS, ABC, NBC, CNN, MSNBC. It's also social media, right? And we're seeing that now with this Hunter Biden laptop story, how it was censored before the 2020 election. Anybody who shared the story was locked out of their accounts, like things like right out of Pyongyang. And now Elon Musk comes along and says, all right, here are all the receipts of how there was shadow banning of conservatives, how Twitter was meeting with the FBI leading up to this election, how this happened, and you could go right down the list as far as blatant censorship by a social media giant. And now the media has, and I'm talking about ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, they will not cover this. 0 seconds on this because they know that they're culpable in that, right? Because they engaged in the same behavior. So yeah, it goes to social media as well. Obviously, Biden is protected. He's a Democrat. Any Democrat will be protected. I think I look at Ron DeSantis down in Florida and the way he hits back at the media. And whenever there is some sort of dishonesty that occurs, like, for instance, with his Don't Say Gay bill, right? Except, oh, no, that wasn't the name of the bill. The name of the bill was the Parental Rights in Education Act, right? But Democratic strategists and those on the media said, no, it's the Don't Say Gay bill. And then it used to be in like scare quotes, and then it just became the Don't Say Gay bill. Like it was redefined. And DeSantis would just push back on that and say, why are you calling it that? You are allowing Democrats to dictate the way that this bill is carried out to the public in terms of narrative. And I think that the way he pushes back, he doesn't do it too often, but when he does, it's strategic. It is impossibly honest, which people appreciate. And then he won by 20 points. So we go back to the midterms. Why did Ron DeSantis win by 20 points? I get that Charlie Crist is not exactly Mike Tyson in terms of an opponent. But at the same time, this was a state where DeSantis won by a couple of thousand votes, right? When he beat Andrew Gillum 4 years ago. And then he's winning in Miami-Dade County, Democratic, as blue as it gets, Palm Beach County. And you're like, all right, what formula did he have that other Republicans didn't? And I think it was the fact that he executed on his promises. He pushed back on the media, and he was a guy who just seemed to be his own man. And I think that going forward, whether it's DeSantis or Youngkin or Kemp in Georgia, that seems to be the playbook to go with. And if instead of being friendly with the media like Mitt Romney tried and John McCain tried and George Bush tried, you gotta punch them right back when you know that they're blatantly being dishonest.
Yeah, and the media labeled those three people white supremacists and racist too when they were running. So that's the amazing part. They never learned their lesson that the media is not their friend. But the media, I remember the 1990s, right? And I was young. I was a kid at that point. And I remember growing up, and the media, they did challenge Bill Clinton. They still went after Bill Clinton. Yeah, they supported the Democrats more, but they called a spade, and there was still liberal bias that exists. But I feel like the media is no longer the media. I actually look at them as a bunch of political activists that are pushing a political agenda. Is it fair to say that we really shouldn't allude to them as the media anymore, that the media is kind of dead?
Yeah, journalism has become activism. I mean, you're right. It used to be subtle, right? Like Dan Rather, I guess when I was growing up, I never looked at him and said, oh, he's biased, until that whole thing happened in 2004 with George W. Bush, and even afterwards, he has the audacity to say, yeah, the documents were fake, but the story's still accurate. No, that's not how it works. But up until that point, I felt like Rather was fairly trustworthy, and Tom Brokaw was fairly trustworthy, and Peter Jennings was solid. I still think that Jennings was the best of the three. But then you're right. Then something happened where it's like, you know what? Screw it. We're going to get up on our soapboxes, and we are going to declare that one side is evil and the other side is good. And by calling out only the evil people, that makes us not only great journalists, but better people. It became a good versus evil argument when it came to Democrats and Republicans. And if you're up on that soapbox, if you're Jake Tapper, you're Shepard Smith, you're Don Lemon, I could go down the line as far as people who are supposed to be objective reporters. When you do make that big Aaron Sorkin kind of speechy moment on your network, and then all these publications run with it, like, wow, he's really speaking truth to power. No, you're only speaking truth to power when it comes to one party. I think they enjoyed the headlines too much. I mean, look at Jim Acosta, right? I mean, that guy, daily press briefings, it was all about him every day, right? He would literally do speeches like on the Statue of Liberty when asking an immigration question. And that's funny. Then Joe Biden gets elected and Jim Acosta's no longer in the press room. Why is that, I wonder? Because he can't challenge a Democrat. He's an activist. He's not going to go against his own team. So, yeah, that's where we are at this point. And you see the polls, too. Like, the American people are completely not buying the media anymore, or whatever we want to call them, the activists anymore. Something like, who is this? NBC News had a poll where 8 in 10 independents, so take Republicans out, take Democrats out, independents, though in the middle, 8 in 10 believe that the media makes up stories they know are false, at least sometimes. And you're like, wow, that's what people in the middle think about the media, that they completely support a side. They're completely working against another side. And I at least think that there's hope in the sense where in 2016, Donald Trump received 2 newspaper endorsements out of 59 major ones throughout the country. Right. So Hillary Clinton gets 57 endorsements out of 59, and that gets her a set of steak knives and a concession speech. Right. So even when people were being told how to vote and who to vote for through these endorsements, it was ignored. So I think in a way, if the media is against you, that could be almost like a badge of honor, because they're the least trusted people in the country outside of Congress. So maybe the influence is gone and they can do all the misreporting that they want to. But in the end, maybe people just aren't listening anymore.
But what concerns me is things like the Bounty Gate story and other stories where the media intentionally puts out information they know to be false out there. It will get thousands upon thousands upon thousands of retweets and pushed on social media. And then when the correction comes out, there's like 5 people that pay attention to the correction. That's the way it usually works. So they know exactly what they're doing. It's not like it's just innocent and they're just engaged in negligence. Instead, it's more about, trying to persuade people, trying to manipulate the way people think. And we're seeing this blurring. The Twitter files show us between the blurring of the lines between the media, which is supposed to be the fourth estate, the government, and tech giants that have an enormous amount of control and influence within our society. How dangerous is that? And what can we do to correct this problem and return to honest journalism? Jim Acosta, journalism 101, never become part of the story as a reporter.
Yeah. And then he was the story like every day, right? Clashing with Sean Spicer or Sarah Sanders or Kayleigh McEnany. To answer your question, that was the way you connected those dots were perfect, because it's not just the media, like we talked about, traditional media, broadcast media, newspapers. It's also social media. But then the government aspect should be the scariest part, right? So after the Hunter Biden laptop comes out, and all those emails show influence peddling in places like China, who's our biggest adversary, you had 51 intelligence officers come forward without looking at the laptop, without looking at the evidence, and all in lockstep sign a letter saying this is absolutely Russian.
And according to Miranda Devine, they were all offered to look at the laptop.
Right. You're like, nah, we got some hair standing on the back of our neck, and devils and angels on our shoulder telling us this is what really happened here. And not just like mid-level people. You're talking about John Brennan, who is head of the CIA, right? You're talking about James Clapper, the director of national intelligence, and all these other folks signing this letter. And then that gives the media an excuse to say, well, see, they said it is, so it must be true, without even a hint of scrutiny. So when you have all these entities working in lockstep, boy, it's scary. And to answer your question, I don't know. I don't know what to do. I think Twitter is a great equalizer, because at least you have like these Paul Reveres of social media out there that when there is a report that's wrong or false, and they always go in one direction, to your point, like, right? In other words, they're not innocent mistakes. Because when have we seen in 2 years of Joe Biden, one bombshell that was extremely negative to him that turned out to be false? Not one.
Yeah.
Boy, it's funny how that works, right? But meanwhile, Russian bounties, which was the sickest of all those stories that was put out there, that the sitting president of the United States knew that U.S. troops are being, their bounties being carried out by them, by the Russians, and through the Taliban and so on, and the sitting president didn't do anything about it because he's a Putin pawn or something. I mean, that was the sickest of all of them, I thought.
And conveniently, they corrected the report in February of 2021.
That report, yep, Hunter Biden's laptop was verified by CBS News 3 weeks ago. 769 days and 2 elections later, they're like, you know what? It's absolutely real. It's like, F you. I mean, you knew. 60 Minutes, that was the worst. Leslie Stahl, where Trump's like, you got to look into this. You're 60 Minutes. You got to investigate this. And she's like, there's nothing in there that can be verified. You don't even check. They don't even act
crazy.
Like. And that's the thing. I even thought maybe 60 Minutes would be like the last holdout. But the minute they sign like Anderson Cooper, can I really take that seriously anymore?
No, of course not. And it's good for you, but unfortunately for you, when your book does get to paperback, you're going to have to write an entire new chapter on the Twitter files and include that in the book.
Well, I'm told there's no paperback. I'm like, what's the paperback coming back? Like, no, you just get a hard copy. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I mean, this is funny. This is a good media story. I was on the bestseller list for the Wall Street Journal, Publishers Weekly, USA Today, and Amazon. And that's despite the fact my book came out the same day Hurricane Ian hit Florida. So all these promotional appearances that I had went away for 5 days, right? And I wasn't going to complain. I'm like, these poor people. I mean, look at their homes and everything. And it still made all those lists, right? It didn't make the New York Times for some reason.
I wonder why. And so then, I contact HarperCollins, who's my publisher. I'm like, hey, guys, I mean, how is this possible? I mean, can you see the numbers? Like, can you check under the hood? They go, here's all we know. We can only look at our numbers. And your book doubled the sales of 2 other HarperCollins books that are on the New York Times bestseller list. So I did a little research, and it turns out that the guy who wrote The Exorcist back in 1983 was number 1 on all the other lists I just mentioned, but he wasn't on the New York Times list. But he had a clause in his contract that said, if you're on the New York Times bestseller list, you get this much of a bonus. And then when he wasn't, he goes to the New York Times and he says, what's going on here, guys? I'm on every other list except yours. He eventually sues them. And in open court, they had to admit that it's really an editorial decision. It's not really about numbers. In other words, it's like ESPN doing sports scores and then saying, no, actually, the Giants beat the Eagles on Sunday. We know it said 48-22 on the scoreboard at the stadium, but yeah, the way we saw it, we saw the Giants being more the winner. No, that's not how it works. Call it a book club, but don't call it a bestseller list when you're not even counting the way you should count. I went off on a tangent there completely, but I felt I had to share that story. But it encapsulates encapsulates our entire society. Don't believe what you see. Don't believe what you hear. Instead, believe what we're telling you to believe. And that's the way society operates today. Joe, everyone's got to check out your book. It's a great book. I encourage everyone to get it. We have links up at the PAS Report, PASreport.com. Joe, thanks for coming on. I enjoyed the discussion.
This was fun. I appreciate it. Like, I go on Fox. I get like one or two questions on Hannity, like Max, and I'm there for like 4 or 5 minutes. This was like a good 22 minutes. I could actually talk. It's awesome.
Well, that's the way I like to operate, because the 3.5-minute video segments, what do you get really out of it? And that's part of the problem. We need to explore the conversation.
Yes. Nuance, yes. Nick, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Great guy, and I appreciate Joe taking the time to come on the PAS Report podcast. I have the links up at the PAS Report, so make sure that you follow him. Also, check out his book, Come On Man. It is a fantastic book. It will leave you laughing. You will enjoy it. I could assure you on that. As always, if you find the podcast informative, be sure to leave a 5-star rating and write a review on any podcast platform that allows it. Share this episode with your family and friends, and make sure to tune in on Monday. I got a great guest coming in. So for now, I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back on Monday with another great episode of the PAS Report podcast.
Thank you for listening to the PAS Report Weekly Roundup Podcast.
Have a good one. Bye.
Be sure to rate, share, and subscribe to the podcast so you'll never miss an episode. Also, visit PASreport.com and follow us on Twitter at PAS Report.